The rumble came up Delmar Street a little after 7 that morning, and Walter Greaves felt it in the bench before he heard it. The old wood under his hands carried the vibration the way water carries. A stone dropped at the far end of a pond, a tremor that rolled in slow and then arrived all at once. He had been sitting there since before the streetlights cut out, a paper cup of gas station coffee gone cold beside his cane. He did not turn around. He had learned a long time ago that turning around fast was how a man got hurt, and he had no reason to think this morning would teach him anything different. Then the engine stopped. Not one, not two, a whole row of them, cut in a ragged unison that left the street ringing with the absence of them. Walter heard boots come down on asphalt, heavy and unhurried, and he heard a voice he knew say his name, like it was a thing worth saying carefully. Walter. He looked up. Then, and what he saw parked along the curb in front of the shuttered hardware store made the breath catch behind his ribs, because there was no version of his life in which this made any sense at all. To understand why a line of motorcycles outside a closed hardware store could undo a man who had survived 2 tours and 40 years of disappointment, you have to go back one day, just one. Back to the morning before, when the bench was only a bench, and Walter Greaves was only an old man with nowhere in particular to be. He was 71 years old. He had a bad hip that the Veterans Administration had been promising to look at since the previous autumn, and a knee that announced the weather a full day before the weather agreed to arrive. He lived in a 1-bedroom unit above a laundromat 4 blocks east, in a building that smelled permanently of dryer sheets and old cooking oil, and he spent most of his daylight hours on this bench, because the bench did not ask him for anything. It sat at the edge of a small triangle of grass the city called Hollis Green, across from a diner that had changed hands 3 times in a decade, and a barber shop that had not changed at all since the Carter administration. Walter came to the bench because it was the one place left in his routine that felt like it still belonged to him. His wife, Eleanor, had died 2 winters back. His son lived in a state Walter had to think about to name, and called on holidays with the particular brightness of a man counting the minutes. The bench did not call. The bench did not count minutes. It just held him up, and most days that was the most generous thing in his life. He had his routine, and he kept it close. Coffee at the corner station at 6, the bench by 6:30, a sandwich from the diner at noon, eaten slow. Home before the light went amber. There was a dignity in it. Even if no one else could see the dignity, and Walter had stopped expecting anyone else to see much of anything where he was concerned, he had become, somewhere in the last few years, the kind of old man people's eyes slid off of, the way water slides off oilcloth. That was the morning the biker came. Walter heard the bike before he saw it, the same way he would hear the others a day later, though he did not know that yet. A single engine, throttled down low, the sound of a big machine being asked to move slow through a neighborhood that was just waking. It pulled to the curb on the far side of Hollis Green and went quiet. A man got off. He was big through the shoulders in the way that made his leather vest sit on him like a second skin, and he walked with a hitch in his left leg that Walter recognized before he recognized anything else about him. He had walked with a hitch like that himself once, before the hip went bad and gave him a different one. The man crossed the grass. He had a full beard gone mostly gray, a face weathered into deep lines, and a vest of black leather worn soft at the edges. Across the back, Walter would learn later, was the emblem of the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club, a winged skull above a banner, The stitching faded from years of sun and rain. The man did not look at Walter the way most people did. He looked at him the way one tired soldier looks at another across a mess hall, with a kind of flat recognition that asked for nothing. "This side taken," the man said, nodding at the empty half of the bench. Walter shook his head. "Free country," he said. "Or it was, last I checked." The man huffed something that was almost a laugh and lowered himself down with the careful economy of a person whose body had filed grievances. He let out a breath when he was settled, a long one, and for a while neither of them said anything. The traffic light at the corner cycled through its colors with no cars to obey it. A pigeon worked the gutter. The morning held still around the two of them like it was waiting to see what they would do. "Cold for June," the man said finally. "Cold for any month," Walter said. "My knee's been screaming since 4. "Which knee?" "Left." The man nodded slowly, like this was important information being entered into a record. "Left for me, too," he said, and tapped his own with 2 fingers. "Got it caught under a Humvee, outside Ramadi. Took the rest of me a long time to forgive it." Walter turned and looked at him. Then looked a. "Army Marines, Army," Walter said, and tapped his own chest. 2 tours. Long time ago now. Long time ago for me, too," the man said. "Feels like 10 minutes some mornings. Most mornings," Walter said. They let that sit. There was a language between men who had been to those places, and most of it was not spoken. It lived in the pauses, in the way one of them would look, off down the street at nothing, in the small, unhurried courtesy of not asking the questions that did not need answering. Walter felt something in his chest that he had not felt in a long while, a loosening, the particular ease of being beside a man who did not need him to explain himself. The biker's name was Del Hardigan, though he did not offer it for some time, and when he did, it came out plain, the way a man hands over a tool. He was 63. He had been riding with the Iron Saints for 30 years, had buried more brothers than he cared to count, and had come to this particular bench on this particular morning because he had a doctor's appointment 4 blocks down at 9 and could not stand the waiting room a minute before he had to. The hardware store across the way had been his father's once in another decade, and he liked to sit where he could see the building, even though the building no longer knew him. They talked the way old men talk, in loops and switchbacks, circling and returning. Del pulled a flat tin of mints from his vest, the kind with the hinged lid, and offered it across without a word, and Walter took one because refusing it would have meant more than accepting it did. The mint was old and a little soft and tasted faintly of leather, and Walter decided it was the best thing he had eaten in a week. Del told him about the hardware store across the way, how his father had run it for 31 years and let small boys sweep the floor for a nickel and a piece of hard candy, how the bell over the door had a particular flat note that Del could still hear if he closed his eyes. He had not been able to make himself walk back inside it since the day his father died. He owned it, and he could not enter it. Walter understood that better than almost anything else the man said all morning. Walter told him about Eleanor without meaning to, about the way she used to leave the radio on, so the apartment would not be silent when he came in, about how he still reached for the dial sometimes out of habit and then did not turn it on. He told him she had liked the old stations, the ones that played the songs from before either of them was born, and how she would hum along to half of them and get every other word wrong and refuse to be corrected. He told him she had been gone 2 winters and that the apartment above the laundromat had gone so quiet he sometimes talked to the dryers downstairs just to hear a human voice answer back, even if it was only the thump of somebody else's wash. Del did not offer comfort. He did not say the things people said. He just listened and nodded. And at one point he said, "She sounds like she knew how to take care of a hard man." And Walter had to look away down the street for a while because that was exactly what she had been. "You got kids?" Dell asked after the quiet had held a while. "One, a son, out west somewhere." Walter turned the cold coffee cup in his hands. "Calls on the holidays. Talks fast, like he's got somewhere to be. I don't blame him. I wasn't much of a soft place to land when he was coming up. A man comes back from those places and he's got edges on him he can't file down." He looked at Dell. "You'd know." "I'd know," Dell said. "Never had any of my own. The club's the closest I came. You raise a young man up in something like that. Teach him to ride and to keep his word and to show up when it's hard. And it's not so different from a son, I figure. Just no birth certificate." He was quiet a moment. "There's a kid named Cisco. Picked him up off a bad road 4 years back. He's better than I ever was. Don't tell him I said it." "Who would I tell?" Walter said. And Dell laughed for real that time. A short, rough sound, and it was the only time all morning. Either of them did. Noon came. Walter offered to buy the man a sandwich from the diner, and Dell said he could not. He had the appointment, but he would take the man up on it another day if the offer kept. Walter said the offer kept. Dell stood slow and got his balance under him and looked down at the old man on the bench. "You out here every day?" Dell asked. "Every day the weather lets me." "Good," Dell said. He did not explain what was good about it. He pulled a folded square of paper from his vest pocket, the kind of thing a man carries for years, and he looked at it for a moment, and then he tucked it back. "I'll see you, Walter." "I'll be here," Walter said. And then Dell Hartigan walked off across Hollis Green toward his appointment, hitching on his left leg, and Walter watched him go and felt, for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit, that the day had given him something instead of taking it. He did not know yet that it was the last time he would see Dell Hartigan alive. The call came to the laundromat phone downstairs because Walter's own phone had been shut off 2 months back over a balance he could not square. Mrs. Pham, who ran the laundromat, came up the stairs and knocked and said there was a man on the line asking for him, a man who sounded official. And Walter went down with his heart already starting its slow climb because official voices on telephones had never once in his life brought him good news. The voice belonged to a hospital. Dell Hartigan had collapsed in the waiting room of the clinic 4 blocks down. His heart, the voice said, had simply stopped, the way an engine that has run too hard for too long finally stops, and there had been nothing anyone could do, and he was gone before he reached the floor. The voice was sorry. The voice was always sorry. Walter had heard that exact sorrow before, in a different decade, about a different man, and it landed in the same hollow place it always landed. "Why are you calling me?" Walter asked. "I only just met him." "Yesterday we sat on a bench." The voice paused. "There was a paper," the voice said, "in the man's vest pocket, a folded square of paper, soft with age. And on it, in the man's own hand, was a list of names and instructions about who to call, and at the bottom of the list, added recently in fresher ink, was a single line. It said, asterisk, if anything happens, tell the old man on the bench at Hollis Green. He'll know what it meant. Asterisk. Walter stood in the close heat of the laundromat with the receiver against his ear and the smell of fabric softener thick around him, and he did not know what it meant at all. He had known the man for the length of one morning. He could not have said the names of Dell Hartigan's children, if he had any. He could not have told you the man's middle name. And yet here was a dead man's last instruction, and it had his name in it. an old man on a bench, and the weight of it settled onto Walter's shoulders like a coat handed to him by someone who would not be needing it anymore. "I don't understand," Walter said. "Neither did we, sir," the voice said, but he was real clear about it. "We're required to honor next-of-kin instructions where we can. Is there anything you need from us?" "No," Walter said. "No. Thank you." And he hung up, because there was nothing else to say, and he climbed the stairs back to his apartment one slow step at a time, and he sat down at his kitchen table, and he did not turn on the radio. He thought about not going to the bench the next morning. He thought about it for a long time, lying awake in the dark with the laundromat machines humming through the floor like something alive. A man who breaks his routine on the day he most needs it has nothing left to hold the world together with. And so when the sky went from black to the colorless gray that came before dawn, Walter Greaves got up and dressed and got his coffee at the corner and walked to the bench, leaving the other half empty the way it had been empty before Dell. That was when the rumble came up Delmar Street and arrived all at once in the wood beneath his hands. He looked up, and there they were. A row of motorcycles along the curb in front of the shuttered hardware store, chrome catching the first hard light of the morning, and beside them a line of men and women in black leather vests, with the winged skull stitched across their backs. The Iron Saints, a dozen of them, maybe more, standing in a loose formation that was not quite a wall and not quite a welcome, and at the front of them an enormous man with a white beard and a leather cut that read "President" over the left breast was walking across the grass toward Walter. "Walter," the big man said again. He stopped a respectful distance from the bench. "My name's August Reyes. They call me Pastor, on account of I used to be one before. This—" He gestured at the vest, at the men behind him, at the whole improbable morning. "Dell rode with us 30 years. He was my sergeant-at-arms. For the last 12 of them, there wasn't a steadier man in the club." Walter found his voice somewhere down in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said. "I only met him yesterday. I don't know why he—" "We know," Pastor said. "We know exactly how long you knew him. That's the part we came to talk about." He lowered himself down onto the empty half of the bench, slow, the way Dell had the morning before, and the wood took his weight with a groan. Behind him, the others stayed where they were, quiet, the engines ticking as they cooled. "Mind if I sit? My own knees aren't what they used to be either." "It's a free country," Walter said, and his voice broke a little on it. "Or it was." Pastor huffed the same almost laugh Dell had huffed, and Walter understood that it was a thing the man had probably learned from being around Dell for 30 years, the way people pick up each other's small habits without knowing it. "Dell came to see you yesterday morning," Pastor said. "We didn't know that, not till after. He told the boys he had a doctor's thing and he'd be back by noon. He didn't tell us he was sitting with a stranger on a bench. He didn't tell us your name." He paused, but he wrote it down. "Before he ever met you, I'd bet, because Dell didn't do anything by accident. He left a note," Walter said. "The hospital told me about an old man on a bench." He did more than that. Pastor reached into his cut and drew out an envelope, thick, the paper good, and he held it in both his big scarred hands like it was something that might break. Dell knew his heart was bad. The VA had been telling him for 2 years to slow down, and he'd been telling them where they could put their advice. He went to that clinic yesterday because we made him, because I made him. And before he went, he put his affairs in order the way a man does when he's been to enough funerals to stop pretending he won't be at his own. He turned the envelope over. "Your name's on this, Walter. He wrote it after he left you. We found it in his locker at the clubhouse last night. with a letter telling us what to do. Walter looked at the envelope and did not reach for it. "I don't understand any of this," he said. "I sat with a man for one morning. I bought him nothing. I gave him nothing. We talked about our knees." "You gave him the bench?" Pastor said. "Anybody would have." "No," Pastor said, and his voice was very level. "They wouldn't. They don't. Walter, that man hadn't sat easy next to a stranger in 20 years. He came back to the clubhouse the day before yesterday, and he was different. And we all saw it, and none of us asked, because you don't, with Dell. He told one of the younger boys, Cisco. He said he'd met somebody who knew the same quiet he did, somebody who didn't fill it up with noise." Pastor looked out at the row of bikes, at his people standing among them. "We bury a lot of brothers. Most of them die hard, and most of them die angry. Dell died the morning after he found a quiet he could stand to sit in. We owe the man who gave him that. We don't let a debt like that go unpaid. It's not how we're built." Walter's hands had begun to shake, and he pressed them flat against the wood to still them. "I can't take anything from you," he said. "I won't. He doesn't owe me. I don't even. It's not about owing." Pastor set the envelope down on the bench between them, gently, and did not push it any closer. "Open it when you're ready, or don't open it. That part's yours. There's 2 things in it Dell wanted you to have, and I'll tell you what they are, so you can't tell yourself it's charity, because Dell would come back and box my ears if I let you think that Walter said nothing." The whole green seemed to be holding its breath, the dozen leather-clad figures standing motionless in the early light, the chrome burning where the sun touched it. "First thing," Pastor said, "Dell owned the building across the street, the hardware store, his daddy's place. He's owned it free and clear for 19 years, and he's let it sit empty because he couldn't bring himself to sell it and couldn't bring himself to walk back inside. There's an apartment above it, 3 rooms. Heat, that works. A window that looks out on this green." He paused. "He left it to you. Not the store, just the apartment and the right to live in it as long as you draw breath, and a small trust that pays the taxes in the heat so nobody can ever take it from you." He wrote that he wanted the old man on the bench to be able to look out a window at the place where somebody finally sat with him. The sound that came out of Walter then was not quite a word. Dentes. He had spent 2 winters in a unit above a laundromat that smelled of other people's clothes, watching a balance he could not pay climb on a phone they finally shut off, and he had made his peace with ending his days there because making peace with things was the only currency he had left. And now a man he had known for one morning was reaching out from the other side of a stopped heart to hand him a window. "The second thing," Pastor went on, and his voice gentled even further, "is smaller, but Dell said it was the one that mattered." He nodded toward the line of bikes, and a younger man stepped forward, dark-haired and lean, with a vest that read Sergeant at Arms, where Dell's must have read the same. The patch clearly new, recently sewn. The young man carried something folded over his arms. He came to the bench and crouched down so he was level with Walter, and Walter saw that his eyes were red and that he had been crying and had stopped himself, the way a man does. "My name's Cisco," the young man said. "Dell trained me. He stopped, started again. "He was the closest thing to a father I ever had. He never once said it, but I knew it. He held out what he carried. It was a leather vest, black, worn soft, and on the front over the heart was a small patch that did not say Sergeant at Arms or President or anything about rank. It said, in plain stitched letters, Friend of the Saints. "It's not a member's cut," Cisco said. "You didn't earn it the way we earn ours, and Dell wouldn't insult you by pretending you did. There's maybe 4 of these in the whole country. It means any saint anywhere. You're his. You break down on a road at 3 in the morning, you call the number sewn in the lining, and somebody comes. You get pushed around by somebody who thinks an old man's an easy thing to push. You call, and a lot of us come. Dell carried a paper for years with names on it, people he'd look after. He added you to it the morning he met you, before he knew about the apartment or any of it. He just wrote your name down because he meant to come back. Walter took the vest. He could not have refused it if his life had hung on the refusing. The leather was heavier than it looked, supple from years of someone else's weather, and he held it in his lap with both hands the way Pastor had held the envelope, and the shaking in his hands moved up into his shoulders and his chest, and finally up behind his eyes. And Walter Greaves, who had not cried at his own wife's grave because he had been too busy holding everyone else up, sat on a bench in the early light and wept while a dozen strangers in leather stood guard over him and let him. Nobody told him to stop. Nobody filled the quiet with noise. That was the thing he understood, even then, even through it. These were people who knew how to be present at a hard thing without making the hard thing about themselves. Dell had known the same quiet, and now Walter understood where the man had learned it. When the worst of it had passed, Pastor put one enormous hand on Walter's shoulder. Light. The way you'd touch something you respected. "There's a thing we do," Pastor said. "When we lose a brother, we ride. We're riding for Dell this morning, out to the ridge where we scatter our people, and we'd be honored if you'd come. There's a sidecar on Cisco's bike. Dell's bike now by rights, but Cisco rides it till he earns one of his own." He paused. "You don't have to. Dell would want the last face he made room for, to be there when we let him go." Walter looked down at the vest in his hands, and then up at the row of motorcycles and the patient faces above the leather, and he thought about the apartment with the window that looked out on the green, and he thought about Eleanor leaving the radio on so the silence would not get him, and he understood that this was the same kindness in a different shape. Somebody making sure an old man did not have to sit in the quiet alone. "I'll come," he said. They got him up off the bench with more care than the VA had shown him in 5 years. 2 of the younger saints taking his elbows like he was made of something precious, and they walked him slow across Hollis Green to the bikes. Cisco's machine had a sidecar bolted to it, low and black, and they settled Walter into it with a folded blanket behind his bad hip, and somebody buckled him in with hands that were gentle and did not fuss. And Walter sat there in the strange low seat, with the friend of the saint's vest on over his thin jacket, and felt ridiculously like a boy on the first morning of something. Pastor swung a leg over the lead bike with an ease that belied his size. He raised one hand, fingers spread, and held it there, and all down the line the engines came alive at once. A sound that Walter felt in his teeth and his breastbone and the soles of his feet. A sound like the world clearing its throat. And then the hand dropped, and the whole formation rolled forward off the curb and out onto Delmar Street, chrome flashing, and Walter Greaves rode out through the waking city in the cradle of a dead man's kindness, with the wind taking the tears off his face as fast as they came. The ridge was an hour out of the city, up a county road that climbed through scrub oak into open gold country, and the riders held a slow, disciplined pace the whole way, the kind of pace that says we are in no hurry to arrive at the thing we are going to do. From the low cradle of the sidecar, the world looked different than Walter had ever seen it. The asphalt unspooled close beneath him, the painted line ticking past, and the bikes around him moved, as one body, shifting lanes together, leaning into the curves, at the same instant like a flock of birds that had agreed on something without speaking. He could see the faces of the riders nearest him when the road bent. None of them looked at him with pity. That was the thing he kept noticing. They looked at him the way you look at someone who belongs in the formation, and the not being pitied was its own kind of medicine. People pulled over to let them pass. A man at a gas station took off his cap and held it against his chest until the last bike had gone by. A line of children outside a church waved, and several of the saints lifted a hand to them, and one of the women riders gunned her engine once, gently, to make the smallest of them shriek with delight. And Walter saw that whatever the world thought it knew about men and women like these, the world had not been paying attention. A farmer stopped his truck at a crossroad and simply sat, engine idling, letting 20 motorcycles roll through a stop sign that was theirs by right of grief that morning. Nobody honked. The whole county seemed to understand, the way country places sometimes do, that something was being carried up that road that deserved the room. Walter felt the wind go through the thin weave of his jacket and under the heavier leather of the vest, and the vest held the cold off in a way his own coat never had, and he understood that it had kept a great many mornings off a great many men. Somewhere in the second half of the ride, with the gold hills opening up and the city long gone behind them, Walter stopped, gripping the edge of the sidecar. He let his hands rest. He let the road take him. For the length of a few miles, he was not an old man being driven to a funeral. He was just a man moving through the morning inside something larger than himself, and he had not felt that since a different country and a different decade, and he had never once expected to feel it again. At the top of the ridge there was a flat place where the grass had been worn down by years of boots, and a single iron post set in concrete with no marker on it, and a view that ran out across the valley until the land went blue with distance. They shut the engines down. The quiet up there was enormous. The kind of quiet Dell must have meant, a quiet that did not need filling. Pastor stood at the iron post with a small steel urn in his hands, and he did not give a speech because the club was not built for speeches. He said Dell's name. He said the year Dell had come to them and the things Dell had done for them. Plainly, a man fixing another man's bike at the side of a road in a storm, a man sitting 3 nights in a hospital chair beside a brother who had no one else, a man who never once raised his hand in anger inside the club in 30 years, and never once failed to raise it for them outside. And then Pastor said one more thing. He said, day before he died, Dell found a bench and an old soldier who knew how to sit quiet, and it did him more good than anything we ever gave him. So this morning we brought the old soldier up here to send him off, because that's what Dell would have done for any one of us. And we are not going to be outdone in decency by a man who's already gone. He looked at Walter. You knew him a day. You knew the right day. You want to say anything. The floor's yours. You don't. That's fine, too. Walter had not planned to speak. He was not a man who spoke a thing. Yet he got himself up out of the sidecar with Cisco's hand under his arm, and he stood at the edge of that worn, flat place with the valley falling away blue in front of him, and he found that there was, after all, one thing he needed to say. I told him about my wife, Walter said. His voice was rough, but it carried. I hadn't said her name out loud to a living soul in 2 years. I don't know why I said it to him. He just had a way of making the quiet safe to put things in. He stopped. The wind moved across the ridge. He told me I'd buy him a sandwich another day. I'd have liked to buy that man a sandwich. He looked at the urn in Pastor's hands. I'm sorry. I didn't get to, that's all. It was enough. He could see it was enough in the faces around him, in the way Cisco looked at the ground and pressed his lips together, in the way Pastor nodded slow and turned to the iron post. They scattered Del Hartigan off the ridge into a wind that took him out over the Gold Valley, and the saints stood with their heads bare and their hands folded, and not one of them made a sound. And Walter understood that he was standing inside something that the rest of the world, with all its institutions and its sorry voices on telephones, did not know how to build. A grief that did not perform itself. A loyalty with no paperwork behind it. A debt paid, not because anyone could enforce it, but because these people would not be able to live with themselves if they left it unpaid. When it was done, they rode back, slower still, and they did not take Walter to the laundromat. They took him to the hardware store, and Pastor produced a key on a worn leather fob, and Cisco helped Walter up the narrow stair on the side of the building to a green door with a brass knob, and the key turned, and the door swung open onto 3 rooms full of morning light. There was a bed made up with clean linen. Somebody had clearly put on within the last day. There was a small kitchen with a kettle on the stove. There was a chair set by the front window, an old leather armchair gone soft with age, angled so that whoever sat in it would look directly out across Delmar Street and Hollis Green to the bench. And on the windowsill, where a man could not miss it from the chair, somebody had set a small radio. Walter stood in the doorway and could not make himself cross it. Cisco came up beside him. "Del set this up over the last 2 days," the young man said quietly. "After he met you, he sent 2 of us over yesterday afternoon to clean it and air it out. He picked the chair himself out of his own place," he said. Cisco's voice caught, and he pushed through it. He said the old man liked to look at the bench, and he should be able to look at it from somewhere warm. He nodded at the windowsill. "The radio's his. He said you'd know what it was for." Walter crossed the threshold then. He walked to the chair and lowered himself into it, and it took his bad hip, the way no chair had taken it in years, like it had been waiting for him, and he looked out the window across the street to the bench, in the triangle of green, the bench that had been his, and then for one morning had been theirs. Music came up soft into the 3 rooms, an old station playing old songs, and it filled the quiet, the way Eleanor used to fill it, the way Del had known it needed filling without ever being told. Down on the curb, the Iron Saints were swinging onto their bikes, getting ready to ride back to whatever lives they had set down for a morning, to honor a man and pay a debt to a stranger. Pastor looked up at the window and saw Walter in the chair, and he did not wave, because waving was not the kind of thing these people did. He just touched 2 fingers to his brow, the way you'd salute someone you'd decided was worth saluting, and then he started his engine. Walter raised his hand to the glass. Cisco lingered in the doorway. "There's a number in the lining of the vest," he said. "I know I told you already. I'm telling you again, so you'll believe it. You're not alone anymore, Walter. You understand what I'm saying. Whatever happens, whoever gives you trouble, you've got a whole club now. That's what the patch means. That's what Del wanted you to have. More than the apartment, more than any of it. He wanted you to never have to sit in the quiet, by yourself again unless you wanted to." He paused at the door. "He meant to come back and buy that sandwich you know with you. He told Pastor it was on his list for today." Then Cisco went down the stairs, and a moment later his engine joined the others, and the whole formation pulled away down Delmar Street in a long ribbon of sound that faded slowly into the ordinary noise of the waking city, until Walter could no longer tell it from the rest. He sat in the chair by the window with the radio playing, and looked out at the bench. The sun had climbed high enough now to lay a band of warm light across the green. right along the seat where the two of them had sat. Pigeon worked the gutter. The traffic light cycled through its colors. An old man with a cane came shuffling up the far sidewalk, slow, looking for somewhere to rest, and Walter watched him spot the bench and make his careful way toward it, and lower himself down onto one half of it, leaving the other half open out of the same instinct that had kept Walter's open all those years. Walter looked at the empty half of that bench for a long moment. Then he got up out of the chair, slower than he'd have liked, and he took the Friend of the Saints vest off the back of it where he'd hung it, and he put it on over his thin jacket. And he found his cane, and he made his way down the narrow stair and out across Delmar Street into the band of warm light. He sat down on the empty half of the bench beside the stranger. "This side taken?" Walter asked. The old man shook his head. "Free country?" he said. "It is," Walter said. "It surely is." And the two of them sat there in the morning sun, while the radio played faintly through an open window 3 rooms up, 2 old men with bad knees and nothing in particular to say, keeping each other company in the kind of quiet that does not need to be filled. The kind a man named Del Hartigan had spent his last good morning teaching an old soldier how to share. If this story moved something in you, if it made you think of a quiet you've shared with someone, or a kindness you never got to repay, take a moment today and sit with someone who looks like they could use the company. You never know what one morning on a bench can mean. Thank you for being here, and if stories about loyalty and the family we choose stay with you, stay close, there are more of them coming.